Hi everyone, welcome back to another video. So for today's tutorial, I thought it would be fun to do some watercolor flowers. So I will have the reference photo down in the description for you along with the line drawing here. And if you're just here for the tutorial, I will put a timestamp right here, but I'm just going to go over the supplies real quick for those who want to follow along. So as always with my watercolor paintings, I've got a jar here for dirty water, and I've got a jar here for clean water just off camera that you can't see, because my sketchbook, which is the Etchr Coldpressed sketchbook, and I believe this is the 9x12 or 9x11, something like that. So it's pretty big, so it takes up a fair amount of space. Today I'm going to be using my Daniel Smith watercolors because I find those are really beautiful for florals and stuff like that. So we'll be switching and using those. I've got two brushes here. I've got an 8 round and a 4 round, and these are both silver black velvet brushes, but use whatever brushes that you have on hand. I've also got a little cloth here that I can, pat some water off if I need to get rid of some water on my brush. And I think that's it. So we're going to get right into it. And to start off, I'm going to start mixing up my colors for the flowers. And I'm thinking like a nice peachy orange flower here, maybe a nice pink flower here, and then sort of like a reddish pink flower here. So we'll start mixing up our pink. And I'm going to get a fair amount of color down. And this is just a little pipette that I use to put color down, and I'm thinking maybe my opera pink to start off with our base layer, and this is a really nice bright pink. Now I know this is not a light fast color, but I don't really mind because I am working in my sketchbook. But if you wanted a color that's a little more light fast, you could always choose like quinacridone rose color or something like that. So I'm just going to get a good amount of that pigment. Okay, and I'm just going to go right in, wet on dry, and just start putting this in. Now my number 8 brush here has a pretty nice tip on it. If yours doesn't, you're having trouble getting those like little points in the petals, you could always switch to a smaller brush, but because these petals are fairly big, I'm going to continue with my number 8. And I did lighten my sketch a little bit before starting, so you lighten yours as much as you need to. You still want to be able to see the sketch, but if you don't want to see your lines coming through it, then, just lighten it as much as you need to. So I'm pretty much just going to lay down a nice light base layer color here, and then we're going to go over top and build some of our shadows in. We could go petal by petal and do a wet and wet technique, and I do love doing wet and wet, but because there are a lot of petals and that would take a while, I'm just going to lay in, a flat wash, and then I'll build up my shadows from there for each flower with sort of a wet on dry. And I'm still being careful to go around the petals of the other flower. Okay. And so I'm going to tap off any moisture off my brush, and the places where I see that it's pooling a little bit, I'm just going to pick that extra color up. And again, I'm going to tap off. And because it's the lightest up here towards some of these top petals, I'm just going to take some of this pigment off, and I'll wipe it on there, and I'll go to the next one and take some off. Now this is a staining pigment. I think most Daniel Smith colors are staining pigments. So if you don't want it to stain, you know, take care and do this a little bit quicker, but I just want to show that those tips are just slightly lighter than everything else. Okay, so we'll go on and we'll do our next color, and we'll probably work on this one down here. A little fuzzy there. And I'm actually going to go and just pick this color up that's transferred onto this leaf a little bit. There. And we'll let that part dry there, and we'll carry on. Okay, so I'm going to mix a peachy pink color here. Maybe, yeah, more of like a peachy orange, I guess. And I guess I don't need so much water, so I'm not going to put as much this time. You kind of learn on the go. You never know how much you're going to need. So I'm going to go in with, I think I'm going to do a little bit of my new gamboge, which is a nice warm yellow. And since I have the pyrrole orange, I'm going to use that. But you could always go in with a warm yellow and mix the two to get your peachy color. And might actually throw a little bit of the pyrrole red in there too, just to redden it up. And I'm actually just going to get another little pile and get some extra water here, because I do want it sort of watered down. A little bit more of that pyrrole. Okay, so that's sort of I kind of like this color more actually, so we'll go with this one. It's sort of like a light orangey color. And again, I'm just going to go over the whole flower. Sometimes it's hard to see when you're mixing colors on your palette how they're going to look on your paper, so it's always like a trial and error. And if you don't like it, you can always take a piece of paper towel, dab it off real quick, put another color down. Just experiment. And just like right here, I went over the edge a little bit, so I'm just going to take a Kleenex or paper towel, whatever you have, and we're just going to sop that up. So as I'm doing this, I'm trying to make sure I have pigment on the bottom here. So as I'm dragging it down, you can see it's not creating like a line yet because we are doing wet on dry. If you don't have enough water and enough pigment along here, it will create sort of a line. Okay. So again, I'm going to tap everything out of my brush and just pick up areas where there's a little extra pigment. And sort of starting to create just slight highlights. Now it's starting to dry over here, so I'm going to mix up the colors for this flower. And I'm thinking sort of a nice red flower. So I'm going to start again by just putting, if I can get it in my cup, just putting a little glob of color down, or water, I guess, then we'll add the color. And I'm thinking I'm going to go with my quinacridone rose this time. It's a little bit more of a powerful pink than the opera rose that you can see. And I'm going to add a touch of pyrrole scarlet to it, just to warm it up slightly. So it's sort of like this really nice, almost lipstick red. And I'm going to add just a hint more of the magenta to, or quinacridone rose to it, so it's just more on the pinky side. Okay. So sort of like a color like this. And we're just going to start filling in. So I'm probably going to start over this way and work my way this way, just for the sake that I want to make sure that that's really nice and dry. Now if I want to lighten the color, I can dip it in my water and then drag my brush just to get a little bit more of that color off. But I do want this to be like a nice vibrant red. So I don't mind if the, our lightest layers are a little bit brighter than what the other two flowers would be. Again, I'm trying to make sure I've got enough water there too, so it's not going to cause that little line. And sorry if I go a little quiet while I'm concentrating. I'm trying to talk through everything that I'm doing, but sometimes it's tricky. Okay. So same technique, I'm going to tap that off. And I'm just going to grab a little pigment. Now the nice thing about Daniel Smith colors, I don't know if you can tell, but it's granulating a tiny bit. I find on this paper it doesn't granulate as much, but if you had a really nice textured cold press paper, even though this is cold press, I find it's a little bit smoother. But if you had a really nice textured cold press one, I find the Daniel Smith paints granulate so beautifully, and that's why I like them with florals especially. All right. So while that's going, I think I'm going to mix up a little color for our leaves. Actually, you know what? We'll fill this one in too. And I think we'll use the same colors as this one since they're pretty close. Maybe we'll mix these two colors together and get sort of an in-between color. And again, I'm just going to grab just a touch off the top there. And it might not be noticeable on the camera, but it's just, you know, ever so slightly lighter. Okay, so now for the leaves, I'm thinking a nice bluish green color. So I think I might use my Cascade green. It's a really nice, like blue-green color, and it granulates nicely as well. So I'm going to get a fairly thick mixture of this because they're just small areas. And I'm just going to go in and fill in our leaves. And I'm going to be careful right now not to go too far into the branches, because we'll do those after. And I'm just going to use the same color. Oh, that touched a little bit there, but I kind of don't know if I like that or not. So we're just going to get rid of that. And then we'll just add some more color to our little rosebud afterwards. Or flower bud, I guess. I guess these aren't roses. Usually I paint roses or I draw roses. But, you know, I'm not sure what flowers these are. I might have to look that up. If you know, leave it down in the comments below, please, because I think these are super pretty. And I'm still using my size 8 brush because I have, you know, a pretty good tip on it. But you use whatever brush that you feel comfortable using. And don't think you need to have a bunch of brushes. I would say to start, maybe a size 4, 6, and 8, or maybe, you know, a 4, 6, 8, and 12, depending how big you want to paint. If you're doing a lot of backgrounds or something, and you're doing wet and wet, and a nice big 12 size brush might be nice. But other than that, you don't really need too big of brushes. Okay. So I'm going to let our flowers dry, and then we'll come back, well, yeah, I'm going to let this dry, and then we'll come back with our next layer. Okay, so now that our flowers are dry, I've cleaned up my palette, because one thing, I know you see a lot of artists that have colors all over their palette, but I hate a dirty palette. Here, I don't mind if it gets dirty over here, but I need space to put my colors, so I just cleaned that up real quick. And we're going to start putting in some of our darker values here for our pink. So I think I'm going to go with our quinacridone magenta with sort of like a nice like magenta color, as it suggests, I suppose. And I'm going to do just a hint of some imperial purple, just to get a little bit of color variation in there, so that it'll look different from our red one, because I don't want the shadows to be the same. Okay. So I'm just mixing up those two colors until I get a color that I like. Now I'm going to grab another brush here. So I'm just going to grab another 8 round, and this just happens to be my Princeton Neptune number 8 round. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to lay some color down, and then we're going to use this brush to sort of feather it out or blend it out, I'm going to say. So I'm going to tap most of the color off on this one, and I'm going to use this and start to go in and put some shadows in. And then I'm going to take this one and just sort of blend that area out. Sort of like we're doing a wet on wet, but and just going to put a little bit more color in there. All right. And for this, I'm going to skip petals. So I've done this petal, and I'm going to skip this one and move on to our next petal. So which will be this one. You could certainly do this wet on wet if you wanted. And maybe we can try that for a couple of petals to see, you know, how that works too. Sorry, I just got interrupted there for a minute. But I'm just going to carry on. And I think on this paper, maybe doing wet on wet might be better, because I'm finding this paper dries pretty quickly, so you don't have a lot of time to kind of go in and move that pigment around like I would like to. So we might switch up our technique. And that's a lot about painting too. You gotta, you know, depending what paper you're using, what paints you're using, you might need to, you know, switch things up and go, okay, this isn't working. So for this one, we'll do a wet and wet technique. So I'm going to paint this with just clean water. And actually, I'm going to bring my water a little bit closer for this. And I'm going to not quite touch the other petal because I don't want it to bleed. And we don't want it to be soaking wet, just enough wet that the pigment will move around. And we'll try dropping in some of this color. I kind of like that. So maybe we'll do that for this one now. And we'll drop some of this in here. Okay. And I'm going to go in, and even where it sort of touches here, it's still where the shadow is. So I'm still going to go in and drop some pigment down, because if it blends, it's going to blend down into where the shadow area is. And I'm going to do this little petal here too. But I'm still noticing I'm still going to have to go in, and we'll still darken up some shadows more. And I'm just trying to drag some of that pigment down. Where it's gone a little far. Okay. So I'm going to work on our peach flower now. So I'm going to grab some of that new gamboge color. And I'm going to grab some of our pyrrole red. A little bit more new gamboge. A little bit more pyrrole red, just to make it, sort of want a nice, like, dark peach color, almost like a bright orange. Okay. So I'm going to start doing it sort of the way I was doing it before. So I'm going to lay this color in. And then I'm going to take this one and just blend it out. So I think you could certainly do it either way. I guess it's just whatever way's more comfortable or easy for you. And I'm trying to work on separate petals, but kind of at the same time. Just going to take this brush and just scrub up that area there. And you decide which technique you like the best, and you can carry on with that. You don't have to choose what I'm choosing. You choose whichever one works for you. Okay. So I think I actually like the look of like the wet on wet technique better. So maybe we'll do that for this one as well. So I'm going to go ahead and mix up. I think I'm going to go in with alizarin crimson here because I want a really nice dark red. And I might pop in a hint of quinacridone magenta. Okay, and I'm going to leave that brush for a minute there. And I'm going to take this one, and I'm basically probably just going to wet most of it. I'm going to leave this little one out, but I'm going to just start wetting maybe we'll do one petal at a time again. Okay. Wet these two at the same time, I think. And just drop some color in. And I'm going to let this dry before I do this petal. So we'll go down to this little one down here. Now I don't want a whole lot of water. But I'm going to drop it in at the bottom and on the sides. And just let that blend out. Okay, so while we're letting the rest dry, maybe I'm just going to go in and sort of just stop that spreading a little bit in a couple of areas. I want to preserve the lightest areas. Okay. So maybe we'll go in and we'll work on the branches a little bit right now. So I'm going to mix up some sepia. I want some sepia. And I'm going to get some of that Cascade green that we were using as well. I'm going to get this a little bit thicker. And then we can also go in and throw in some shadow areas here and there where we need that. Okay. So my water's a little bit dirty, but that's okay because this is going to be darker anyway, but I'm going to throw some water down first. And then I'm going to grab some of the sepia and start tapping that in down here. And before it gets up to the flower, I'm going to go ahead and drop some of that Cascade green in, because this is a little sort of green area in here, and I'll let these two colors kind of blend together. Okay. Okay, I'm going to get a little bit more. And I'm going to try painting this side a little bit more wet on dry, just so you can see the difference between the two. And then decide for yourself which you like better. I like to experiment and try different ways, so you never know what way you'll like more. Now I'm not going to go all the way up to that flower. Okay. Now I'm going to grab that Cascade green, and I'm going to drop that in under our flower, and I'm going to just let it touch and blend there. Okay, and I'm going to get my damp brush, and while I'm doing this, I'm also going to just put a little bit on these leaves. Might even do like a hint of wet on wet. I don't want them to blend out completely. I just want a little bit of darkness on the bottom of them. just to give some variation. You can do as much or as little that you want. Now here I'm not going to touch the stem. I'm going to try not to touch it just because I don't want it to bleed in that much there. If a little bit does, that's fine. I'm still just playing around, just dropping that pigment in. Just kind of coaxing it around where I want it. Okay. And I'm just going to go back with just a hint of that sepia here and just darken up this spot here. And down here where I notice we're losing a little bit of that. Okay. So now I'm going to go in and wet this petal here. And we'll drop in that dark color that we were using, that reddish. And I might even need just a hint more. And I'm going to run a little bit just on the side over here. And I'm just going to blend out the edge of it because there's not too much of a shadow here, but I do see a little line of one. Okay. And I think I might just go back in and darken this up a little bit again. Just right at the bases, and then I'm going to go in and sort of stop where that paint's gonna flow. Okay. So I think I'm going to go in and just do just a couple more darker shadows in here, and then that will be it. I might do here, and that one again, and then that'll be it, just to darken up some shadows a tiny bit. So I'm going to go in with this, just add a hint of our alizarin crimson. And I may or may not even bother getting rid of the edges of these ones. Right. Just soften a little bit in a couple spots. So I'm just using the dry brush to sort of blend it out, almost like dry brush it out. And I'm just going back and forth, just wherever I feel my piece needs some darker shadows in it. So at this point, I'm less really looking at the reference photo, and I'm looking at my picture, going, where do I need to add some shadows? Where do I need to add, you know, some darkness? So I'm going to mix up the same color that we used in here. So I'm going to take some of that quinacridone magenta and some imperial purple. Okay, now I'm going to do the exact same thing. So I'm just kind of going along just the spots where I really want some darkness to be. So I'm not taking this shadow as far as the other shadow that we've done before, because I want this to be the darkest shadow. And I'm just constantly dabbing off the tip of my brush just to get rid of that color. So that I can blend it out into a nice lighter transition. And you certainly don't have to, you know, go this far with your color blending, but I just like to have some variation in there. Now I'm going to get this even darker for this petal right in the middle here, because I really want that one to be nice and dark. It's a little bit lighter in the reference photo, but this petal's coming like it's behind the other two, so there would be a bit of a dark shadow down here. Okay, so I like how that purple one's coming out. Okay, so last I'm just going to add a little bit more to this red one. So I'm going to mix up some of our alizarin crimson, and I'm going to throw in some quinacridone magenta. But I'm going to have it pretty red, a nice reddy pink. And I'm going to do just the exact same thing. Just gonna pick up any excess. Now these reds are pretty powerful, so I'm trying to be as careful as I can be with them. And I'm going to do just a little bit on this guy too. Okay, so I really like how that's turning out. Now the last thing I want to do is, I love doing splatters. You can certainly leave this out of your painting or you can add it in. I'm going to personally add it in. So what I'm going to do is the colors that we were just using, I'm just going to add a bunch of water to, and actually we'll take our little pipette, and I don't care that my water's a little bit dirty, and we might have to mix up some more of this color here. So we'll take a little bit of our alizarin crimson, new gamboge. I think I threw a hint of alizarin crimson in there. I meant pyrrole skyrole as well. Don't know why I can't say that. Pyrrole scarlet. That one, and then we'll warm it up. Okay, so these were sort of the three colors that we were doing, and I'm just going to add some splatters in the background. I love doing this. Now you can certainly leave this out like I said, but I find you have to have it pretty wet, and then I just tap my brush. And I don't want to do too much of the one color. And if you get some, let's say you don't want it on your flower, that's fine, just dab it off. That doesn't really bother me. If you want smaller ones, you can use a smaller brush. And the closer you are, the smaller you're going to get. The further away you are, the bigger the droplets will get. So I'm going to go in now and do some of the red. I'm going to add, actually, some quinacridone magenta and some of our alizarin crimson. And again, I'm just going to do a few splatters. I might pick up the ones that land on the flowers. I might not. And I'm going to get some of that quinacridone magenta, some of our imperial purple, and I'm going to do the same with this. There. So I like that. I don't want to go too overboard with it, but just enough that you get, you know, a nice little effect. And I do like that. So I hope you guys really enjoyed this tutorial today. If you did, please give a like, hit the notification bell, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. I do post watercolor tutorials. I try to do them here and there. Some of my other tutorials are a little bit longer, so I always try to get a few watercolor ones in between. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I will see you in the next video.